Hello, everyone. It is Tuesday night, and you are here for Book Talk with Cara. And I'm so glad to have you here tonight because I'm going to introduce you to my friend, Regina Jennings. And I know that you are going to enjoy getting to know her and learn more about all of her wonderful books. And I have this fun stack of them here in my office that I can't even hold. But I have to tell you that when her books arrive, either in my mailbox or on my Kindle, that they jump to the top of my pile. Often, whatever book I'm reading, I just stop and I switch over to hers. So the Fort Reno series, she just wrapped up, and it's set in Oklahoma at Fort Reno. And I loved the heroines. It was such a fun concept. But then her brand new book is the first one in the Joplin Chronicles, Courting Misfortune. And what makes this one so fun is the heroine is a Pinkerton agent or detective. So Regina, we're going to talk about all of this, but do you want to start us off by talking a little bit about yourself? Just introduce yourself and what you're writing.
Hey, Cara, thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to get to visit with you like this since we haven't got to see each other in person for a while. I write historical romance, and most of it's set kind of in the center of America and Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri. And so right now I'm writing Joplin Chronicles, which I was born in Joplin, Missouri, actually, although I've moved to Oklahoma when I was 2 and have been here ever since. And so this series has been really fun. It's got this big rowdy family and a lot of cousins, and they're always getting in each other's way. And then this first one, as you said, has a Pinkerton agent in it who happens to be a female. So it was so fun to write.
Yeah, and you did such a good job with it. And this one really does have kind of that family saga feel with lots of cousins and lots of people getting in each other's business. So is your family like that, where you're just kind of in each other's space and involved in each other's lives?
Oh, 100% yes. We are definitely in each other's business. I mean, as far as just my immediate family, my parents live in my neighborhood. My sister and brother-in-law and their 5 kids live in my neighborhood. My brother, my sister-in-law and their 3 kids live in my neighborhood. Like, we're all right here, and my husband's family lives in town. But even further than that, we are really close with our second double cousins and our third cousins. And yeah, we get together and we have a lot of fun.
That is, my family is the same way, where the cousins are basically like my family, and we just have the best time. And Rachel McDaniel says that she loves your books and that she really loves your heroine for this new one. So how did you come up with the idea that you were going to have Callista, which, what a fun first name, that you were going to have her be a Pinkerton? Because that's just not a normal kind of career for a young woman, especially at that time.
Right. So I was doing research, and I just read nonfiction history books all the time, and picked up one on the Pinkertons, and I came across a name, Kate Warren, and she was the first female detective. And she was, most of her work was done undercover. Like, she didn't go asking questions and interviewing people. She went in undercover. And because women weren't allowed on juries at that time, even their testimony wasn't that valued. It really, nobody expected a woman to be listening in or to be, sleuthing around. And so she was able to have a very successful career just based on the surprise factor that no one knew. And so that's what inspired Callista was, and in fact, in the book, Callista is inspired by her. I mentioned Kate and that she had worked a case for Callista's family. And so that was why Callista decided to be a Pinkerton. So there's a nod to Kate in the book.
Yeah, and I loved that. And that's one of the things I really enjoy about your historical romances is you're out there finding these cool little pieces of history and then building a whole story around it or using that as a springboard. And I loved that as I was digging in to the idea of, I wonder if there could have been a female Pinkerton agent. And then you answered that. And several people are commenting about how, yeah, the big families, you love it when you have a big family that gets along, but even when you're getting along, sometimes it's not always super comfortable. And I loved how you portrayed that in Courting Misfortune, because she needs her big family and they're getting in her business and she doesn't always like it. And it was so real life. It was also a source of a lot of the humor, and your books are known for their humor. So how do you weave that in? Is it something that's just natural and instinctive for you, or is it something you have to work at?
I think it's natural. I think there's I have to choke back a lot of my funny thoughts in real life because I get in trouble, or a lot of my things I think would be funny if I just did them. But the nice thing about fiction is I can let these characters say that obnoxious thing or do this bad prank, and it's okay because they're fictional and I don't get in trouble. People can laugh about it. And so, I enjoy doing that. And she does have a problem. Like I mentioned, Kate Warren was undercover. Well, Callista is trying to be undercover, but they assign her to a city nearby, which is near her family's ranch. And it's hard to work undercover when your family's following you around, asking you why you're acting the way you're acting, and don't go in those places. It's dangerous. And have you lost your mind, girl? So it was
so
really
funny.
fun.
Like those cousins were a hoot, and they were so in her business. And she's like, "You gotta go away." And I loved every bit of that. And it was just so fun how you came up with that. And I'm going to guess that book 2 and 3 are going to have some of those cousins showing up.
Absolutely. Yes. Book 2 is Macy, who is kind of the farm cousin.
Yeah.
And she discovers a crystal cave under Joplin, which this is another historical thing. There is a crystal cave under Joplin. It's perhaps the biggest geode in the world. It was so big they could have dances in it. I mean, covered in crystal, the whole thing. Yes.
Oh, that's so cool.
I know. So when they were doing the mining, they were pumping all the water out and they discovered it. Well, I think it was got in the 30s. It was open for several decades. And then in the 30s, the mining was dying out. So more and more mines were closing. And one Friday it was opened and they locked it up and went. And the next Monday it was full of water and no one's been in it since.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So so anyway, we don't talk about that part of it though. We're talking about the discovery of the crystal cave and Macy doing that because she's mad at a guy and swinging a pickaxe around, down there. And
well, and that's a great, I guess, detour to the pickaxe brand. So you got to explain, because Rachel was like, I love that you've embraced the pickaxe romance brand, and Wendy's laughing at that. So tell us what this pickaxe romance is.
So they put on the cover, my cover's already out for book 2, which I don't have a copy of the book yet. It's not printed, but I do have a cover of the copy of the cover you can see on my website or on Facebook. And she has this gigantic pickaxe, which fits because she actually does use a pickaxe. So it's a little odd to have a pickaxe on your romance cover with the heroine hefting it around. But then I started thinking I have another novella, which the heroine in that never did go with a pickaxe. She just had some rocks that she collected, but they gave her a pickaxe on the cover. And so when I went back and looked, I have 2 pickaxe covers. And so, it's the novella ebook. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm like going through the covers going,
yeah.
I don't see that. I see gorgeous dresses and, really fun stuff. But so how do you find several of the people who are watching right now and listening want to know, how do you find these interesting historical facts and things like the Joplin geode and all of that? Do you just know it from your writing about places that you're familiar with, or are these things that you're discovering as you're looking for story ideas?
I discover them as I read, and reading for fun for me is the same as looking for story ideas, right? Because I love reading history. And so I'm just always kind of have an eye open for that. And occasionally there'll be just a little footnote or just a little mention, and it's enough to say, okay, I need to go check that out. And I'll go start searching to see if I can find more. And one example in this book, Courting Misfortune, is a baby raffle. I came across a
Yes,
mention of a
that was
baby
the
raffle.
craziest thing. I'm like, really?
Yeah, in Joplin, of all places.
Yeah,
They,
little Joplin, and you've got this baby raffle. And I remember reading that and going, are you serious? This really happened?
so they did, there was a children's home that was going to have a baby raffle. They had too many kids and they needed money. So what do? You put a baby up for raffle and hope people buy raffle tickets. And so this promoter did it, and he caused a big uproar. The Elks were behind it, but the women's charity was against it. And there was this big controversy, and the promoter got arrested. I mean, this is in real life. He got arrested, and they said it wasn't going to happen. They weren't going to let him do it. And he bonded out and would get back in the newspaper talking about this baby that needed, and he just kept on. They ended up not raffling a baby in real life. And that was in 1910, but in 1911, there was a baby raffle in Paris. Like, it did happen in real life. Joplin, they got it shut down and didn't do it. But in my fictional book, maybe they're going to do it. We'll just see.
Well, and it was one of those that I was like, no way. And then as I read it, I was like, oh my goodness, that could actually happen. And you could see these people going, well, it solves all these problems. You've got families who want a child and can't have one. You've got these children that are just living in this children's home. That's not as ideal as living with a family. And we need money. And so you could see how they were justifying it. And yeah, I'm an adoption attorney in one of my lives, but oh my goodness, I was like, I can't even imagine. And yet you made it real and poignant, and yet just kind of, there's a twist and all of that I'm not going to share now because we want people to discover it for themselves.
Right,
but right. I mean, that's the kind of research you're doing and finding all these really interesting things that most people would be like, no way, that there's no way anybody would think that that's okay.
And that's why I love the author notes at the end, is I get to say, no, that was real, that, that really almost happened, or that really did happen, or there really is a cave underneath Joplin, or there, that's why I love the author notes, because otherwise people think you're just making this up. It's so much more interesting when it did happen.
Well, and that's one of the things I love. Like, I just finished, Daniel Silva's new book, The Cellist or the Cello Player. It was one of those titles. And he had like 6 pages of author notes at the end. And I love it because I do the same thing with yours and really with any book, because I want to know, okay, what's rooted in reality and where does the author's imagination take over? Because you write fiction, you're writing novels. I do not expect you to have everything firmly rooted and this was actually said and all that. But I do find it's just fascinating when you can start seeing where the history and the story are interacting and it's based in fact. So it's so fun. So book 2 has a pickaxe on the cover and is going to deal with the crystal cave. And then you've got book 3 that you're getting ready to turn in October. So you are a busy lady and you're homeschooling. So that's another thing that you and I have in common. I don't do it anymore, but for a lot of years we were both homeschooling. So how do you find time to write while you're, educating your children and things like that?
Well, I always laugh when people say, is there a certain place you sit down to write and you light a candle and you do all this? And I'm like, no, I have my laptop and we go to, oh, there you go.
Yeah, the candle.
That's your writing candle. I take my laptop to basketball practice. I take it to speech therapy office. I take it to, co-op. Everywhere we go, I have my laptop and I may write in the car waiting for a kid to finish whatever. So I just find those times when someone else is teaching the child for a minute, or maybe when they were younger, they'd be studying their spelling test or something and just sit there next to them and do my homework while they're doing their homework.
And I think sometimes people get this idea, and I do have friends where they write for like 8 hours a day when they're on deadline and they've got this beautiful schedule. but they're not in the middle of actively raising a family. And those of us who are actively raising a family, it literally is, I can't tell you how many chapters I have written at swim meets and gymnastics meets, or, you know, like you said, waiting in the car line, or, you know, just wherever you learn, you can write. You don't need, if you wait for the perfect situation, you're never going to get started. And yet you have, you know, these stacks of wonderful books that are written in 5 minutes here and 20 minutes there. So if you were going to give someone advice on how to get started, what would you tell them?
You just have to write that first book. For me, it was setting a word goal
Yeah.
for daily word goals. Sometimes it's some people work better with a time goal, which, like I said, that didn't work for me because there's so many distractions and I'm going everywhere. So either way, I was going to get that 1,000 words a day in. And I just thought, when I was starting, I thought, I'm going to do all this work and it's not going to go anywhere, and what if it's a waste, and I've wasted a year. But the truth is that year's going to go by and you're going to be a year older, and you'll either have a book done or you won't.
Yeah.
So just go ahead and do it, because in a year you'll wish you tried. So that would be my advice. Just try.
Yeah, and that's such a great way of putting it. And I think sometimes we get daunted by the idea of, we have to write all of that, instead of going, today's goal is to write 2 pages, or like, I've got to finish a novella tonight because my classes at Purdue start in a week, and I'm like, okay, I've got to get this one done so it can get to the editor and stuff. But I know what my pace is now. I've written enough books that I know that in an hour I can get this thing done if I just put my head down and I do the work. But it takes a little while to figure out your pace, but everybody can write 500 words. That's 2 pages, double spaced. And so, you know, you start with something like that, but having that goal and just that discipline of showing up and getting started, I think, is where a lot of people kind of get stuck, because there's that blank screen. So right. Are you someone who starts with characters, or do you start with this really interesting research point? You're like, okay, how do I wrap a story around it? How do you get started with your ideas?
It's probably more the research. It's probably more just some interesting job or place or time in history, town, or some fort. Sometimes it's a fort. So there's just, I start there, and then I start thinking, okay, what kind of people are there? What kind of conflicts would come with that? What would it be? And it's also fun to try to flip it. Like, you find this job that's an interesting, unique job that we don't have now. Let's put a woman in that job, or let's do something unique with it. And so yeah, usually it's the historical fact that starts the story. And then from then I start thinking about the character and who would be the kind of person who would do that or get caught up in that, or, you know, who would it be really hard for them to live through this time? What would that kind of character be like?
Yeah. And you've had some really fun ones. Like, there's the one with the, didn't you have a blacksmith in one of them?
A blacksmth.
Or maybe not.
Like in Love in the Balance, my second one, he was a blacksmith for a while. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And that way, I'm asking you to go way back.
Way back.
So many great books. I do the same thing though, because people will be like, oh, do you remember this character? What was their name? And I'm like,
yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay, do you know how many characters I've written?
And I just named that character after the person sitting next to me at basketball practice. Like, I didn't.
Oh, that's so funny.
Do you ever do that? Do you look around wherever you're at when the character? I mean, not
I'll take this person's first name and that other person's last name, and I'll put them together. And one of these days, I really need to stop and read my books and make a list of the characters, because it was my daughter, my oldest, who said, Mom, this is like your third Abigail Turner.
Really?
Okay. I guess I really like the name. She's like, well, I think it was Turner is the last name. She's like, okay, so you've got Abigail Turner in this book, who must be the grandmother, because it was a World War II book, to Daniel Turner in this book. And then you've got Sierra Turner, because he gets married, and that's a lot of Turner's mom. Are they supposed to be connected? I was like, huh, yeah, I guess they are, but there was no intention at all. I guess I just like the last name Turner. But you don't think of those things when you're writing book 3, 4, 5. It's when you get to book 35 that you're like, I hope I don't have another character with this name.
Or I end up with, when I'm doing a series, I'll have like one book I had, the first book, the hero's name was Jeremiah, and there was a little boy named Josiah, so that wasn't too bad. But then later
yes.
I pulled a guy up from the first series named Joel, and by the end of the series, Josiah was an adult. And so then I had Jeremiah, Josiah, and Joel, 3 grown men now, because they've all
Yeah.
aged. And I couldn't change the earlier names, So that's what I get caught in, is the names are too similar.
Yes. And you don't even realize it, but all of a sudden you've got all these Jane names. Or like right now, I'm like, oh, I've got Austin and Aiden and whatever, and Emma and Eleanor. And I'm like, okay, that's a lot of vowel starting names. And so the things that you don't think about, and then you're like, oh, okay, whose name's going to change? And can I still change it? And
can I give him a nickname?
yes. And then readers sometimes will be like, well, just call them all the same thing. Why do you have all these nicknames and things? And it's like, because I wasn't paying attention at the beginning. So there's a lot of people who are commenting about how they really like your Fort Reno series. So how did you come up with that idea? And I love it because the first heroine comes in, and then it's the hero's 2 daughters who become the heroines in the next book. So how did you come up with those whole ideas? Because that's the thing about a 3-book series. You have to kind of come in with, here's how it's going to play out. So where did that idea come from?
Well, I live about 20 miles from Fort Reno, so it was an easy research trip down the road a bit to go visit it. And it's a very unique situation because it was in the middle of Indian territory at the time.
Yeah.
And people weren't allowed, like there were very few reasons for women to be there. Even on the fort, and the men nursed each other. There weren't female nurses, there weren't female teachers, unless perhaps there was a governess hired by one of the officers, because they weren't going to bring women on base to teach the soldiers, And so that was a challenge, was coming up with reasons that women would be here. But I did want to set that story because it's such a unique time in history. And then it builds up to the land run, which is a very unique thing that's uniquely Oklahoman.
And you did such a fun job with that one. Because that was the major's daughter.
Yes.
And that was, oh my gosh, I had so much fun reading this one. I really felt like your humor came through so clearly in this book.
Oh, so obviously that's one good way to have a heroine there, is if her dad's the commander of the fort. So that works. And so it was just fun. A lot of coming up with ideas of how they got there, like the first one in Holding the Fort. He's looking for a governess, and instead he gets a saloon singer who's pretending to be a governess. So that one, I call it like Sound of Music on the Prairie.
Yeah.
Except for instead of a nun being the governess, she's a dance hall singer. It's a little bit of change there, but.
And not exactly what people at that time would have said. Oh yes, that's the person we want influencing young ladies. And so
you can imagine there's a lot of room for humor in that situation, right?
Absolutely. And so there are several people talking in the comments about how their first was Her Dearly Unintended, and how they enjoyed the twist. And it's one of the most unique stories they've ever heard or read. So how did you come up with that one?
So that's the pickaxe one. So that's actually Josiah's. We're going back to the J names. That was Josiah's story. And they got stuck on they kind of flirted around with as childhood sweethearts, but then he made her angry. And so they had this love-hate relationship, but then they got stuck and stranded when a flood comes, and they're stuck at her place with this weird stranger who's very creepy. And So he just says that they're married, like, this is my wife, you need to leave. And so now they're stuck pretending like they're married with this weird, creepy stranger that's just poking his head in all the time, and they're all stranded there. So that one was a fun one. And she's so sassy. It was a lot of fun. And then he's ornery too. And
Yeah.
yeah.
You write these really great sassy heroines, which is so fun. Now, some of them are, you have to kind of grow into that, but a lot of them just kind of come in with this, hey, I'm here and you're going to hear me. I have a voice, which isn't what we always think of for that time period. So it's so much fun. And then another one was like the Ladies of Caldwell County series, which that was another really fun one. And so, I mean, you've just got this, I don't even know where to tell people to start, because I guess I would say, you know, you need to start with Courting Misfortune because that's the newest one, but really you can't go wrong with a Regina story. They're just fun. And they're all set in that kind of mid to late 1800s. And I know you call them historical romance, but I think a lot of us would say they're really historical romantic comedies.
Oh yeah, that's good. No, I like that. I'll go with that.
Yeah, it's kind of a mouthful, you know, to say mid to late 1800s historical romantic comedies.
Oh, you forgot inspirational.
Yes, I did. I forgot the inspirational part. I mean, that's really important. And Kathleen says that one thing she loves about your characters is that they always have something that makes them feel so real. And I think that's probably she's kind of nailed the thing that makes me always want to jump into your stories, because even though it's a time period I don't live in, and I may not have a creepy guy around the corner or whatever, but I can relate to the characters, even if they're wearing bustles or hoop skirts. So here's a question. Have you ever worn a hoop skirt?
Yes, I have actually. I think I had a banquet dress from the 90s that was of course, you know, a big hoop skirt. And then I do have, so I saw you have Caught in the Middle.
Yeah.
The book Caught in the Middle. I bought that dress. The lady that sewed that
I love this dress.
Yes.
It's so beautiful with that rich red. And
she contacted me and said, I sewed the dress for the cover. Would you like to buy it? And I was like, are you kidding me? Of course. So I've worn that dress to a few events too, which I don't have the full out hoop skirt, but it does lace up in the back. So it does give you that feeling of, I can't breathe. Look at me. I'm old fashioned.
That is so fun. And how cool that she reached out to you like that.
I know. Her husband did the cover picture, and she does the sewing. Isn't that neat?
That is so fun. What a fun career to build for yourself. So very cool. Well, I know this is hard to believe, but our half hour has gone by so quickly. So I want to ask you one last question.
Okay.
What's the last book you've read that you would highly recommend to readers as something that, as a reader, not as a writer, but as a reader, a story you just got caught up in and really enjoyed?
Well, I just finished Elizabeth Camden's series, Hope and Glory. Is that right? It's the Spice King.
Yes.
And Prince of
Such a good series.
Spies. I know, you know those. So I just finished that series and it was really interesting. And she does, like, just like I enjoy doing, she finds those little tidbits of history. And so in that one, there's a lot about the Pure Food Act and how people would dilute their food and everything back in the day to make it cheaper. And it was very dangerous. And so that's what it deals with.
I found that series so fascinating. And because it was set in the DC area where we had lived for 8 years, it was just so fun. But I hadn't thought about all the research and things that would go into, you know, how do we get to the Food and Drug Act and Food and Drug Administration? And why was that even something that Congress decided was worth their attention? But that she, just like with you, she doesn't bog it down. I mean, there's these wonderful sibling characters and just very, very rich. But yeah, that's a great series. Really, really enjoyable. So, well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Regina. It's been so fun to connect and talk about your books. Is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners before we say goodbye?
Oh, just, I hope y'all have a good school year, and I hope that, you know, you have a good fall and it cools off wherever you are. It's nicer weather, right? But thank you so much for having me, Cara. I really enjoyed getting to talk to you, and hi to your readers.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed meeting Regina because, as you can tell, she's just a delight. And her books, if you haven't tried them yet, you really need to, especially if you enjoy historical romance set kind of in that Midwest, Texas-ish area, because they're delightful. And I will see y'all next week.